Hi, welcome to my channel Takniki Gyan Guru. Today we will discuss microservice architecture demo. I will give you a demo on how to deploy a microservices. So there are a few components we will discuss later. So today we will give you a brief about the Node.js application that will be work as a backend API, right? And we will deploy this Node.js backend API as a container. So this will be a one container. Another container would be React.js container that will be a front-end application. So this front-end application will consume the API from Node.js and display here in React.js. And these React.js and container will deploy inside the web server Nginx, right? So this React.js application will be accessed through Nginx web server. So this will be expose some port, and using that port this will be access, and this whole containers, all these containers will be deployed into a Ubuntu box virtual machine, and this virtual machine will be created by Vagrant and VirtualBox. So we have already created some videos on how to create Ubuntu box using Vagrant and VirtualBox from your laptop or any desktop, Windows desktop. So that we have already covered. If you want, you can watch those videos. Now this whole code will be build and test by Visual Studio Code Editor. So we'll give you a demo how you know in the VS Code Editor, right? And next is how these containers will be deployed. So we will use Docker Compose to uh, you know build the image and deploy into Docker environment as a microservices. So now we have understood the architecture, microservice architecture. So let's go to a demo and see how we'll deploy microservice containers into the Dockerized environment. Let's move to the VS Code to understand the different code module. Now we are in VS Code. So we have already created some code here. So let's understand what it is. This is the backend. This is backend. We have created this backend using Node.js. So if you can see the code in the server.js, this is the Express.js we are using. We are using port 5000. This backend API will be accessed through 500 localhost colon 5000 port number, right? So here we are creating an array students. We are defining two uh, two rows here: id 1, name, and grade. Three columns: one is id, name, and grade. We are also putting some data into these two rows, 1 and 2, right? And their name and grades also. So this will be by default display into the React.js using the API, right? And we have created two APIs over here. One is to get the students. So once we will access this API students, it will return this student list of students. And the post method, this is the get method to get the students. And we created one post method, API students, and this post method will insert whatever data is pushing to this API. It will insert this data into the list of students. Let's understand this is one of the code. We'll understand the Docker file. Let's understand the Docker file first. So once this application is built, packaged, then we will deploy this backend as a container. So container using Docker, right? We need a Docker file to containerize this application. So how we'll do that? We will use the base image node colon 18.16.0 hyphen alpine 3.17, right? This is base image we are using. You can use different image as per your requirement. And we are setting up the working directory. Whatever we will copy, it will copy into the F folder now. So we are copying the package JSON. It will be deployed to or move to the app.js folder. Now we are run the install the required package. for this Node.js using npm install. All these modules and packages will be installed or download and installed for this application, and then we will move this whole code, whatever code is there, it will be moved to the f folder now, and we will expose this container as a 5000 port. And now we are starting this application so that this application will start into localhost colon 5000 port number, right? And this is the server.js file for our node.js file. This API will be run into this port, correct? So this will be understood now, the backend, and this will be exposed all the APIs. Front end, this is the web application we have created using React JS, right? So this front end will be consume this API, and to delete or to add or to display the student, right? So how we'll do that? So first of all, let's understand. Go to the front end and source. Here we have created one app.js file. We are importing two form. One is the student list and student form from component folder. Let's understand this component. One is the student list. Student list is, we are just returning all these students, right? If you can see, the key, student id, student name, grade, right? And we are putting one button called delete. So all the student will be listed out here, and then we are putting the delete. From here it will be delete the student, the I mean to say the uh, row. It will say like one student id, one student name or the student grade, and one button will be there, delete. If you delete, it will delete one record from there. So this is the form, the list we have created, where all these student will be listed. And this is the form where we have to add the students, right? So if you can see this form, we have the input button, the name, right? We need to put the name, we need to put the grade, right? Name and grade, and then we'll submit. Using the submit button, this student will be saved, right? Handle the submit. When we submit this form, it will execute this student form, where it will submit, add the student to using the this API, right? So how we'll use that? Let's understand the API one. I'm just showing you the high level details. If you want to describe these application or build from scratch, just let me know by comment, or write on the comment section, so that we will come back with this the how to build this code from scratch. So now if you can understand the app, if you are new in the React.js or Node.js, just comment us, please. We'll definitely come back with the code also. The fetch, right? The API student, it will fetch the data. The API post, here in the post section, we will add the student. We'll get the data, and we'll add the student into the collection of the students in the array we have in the this one. And also we can see, we will access this through API and student. We'll talk about this API later, how we'll access this API and student. We are not mentioning like localhost colon 5000 and then API student, nothing else. We will show you how the microservices will work, right? So this way. And delete also, in the delete we are using the fetch method, delete method, to delete the data. It will update from the student list, right? And here you can see the student management system. This is the whole page where we have the button where we are adding the student here, the student form, right? We have created a student form here. Here we listed the student form, and here it will list the student list, where delete button is also there, right? So let's understand. We'll show you when the browser will come, the UI will come, right? So this is the code for the React.js, and this was the code for the Node.js as a backend, and front end is a React.js. Let's understand the Docker for how this front end will containerize. This similar, right? we have used the base image, the same image name as we used in the backend no, image uh, for the backend, working directly same application, and we are copying the package.json. Again, we are running the npm install to download and install all these modules and packages, copying other all the folder inside the front end into the app, and then we are exposing 300 ports so that this application should access by this port 300, and we are just starting our application so that this application should access through this port. Correct. So we have understood both of the container. One is the backend container, and second one is front end container. Now we have the Docker Compose, right? Docker Compose file. So when we are creating microservices, then we have a different way to deploy this microservices. One of the way is using Docker Compose, right? We have another way to deploy the microservices as a the Kubernetes, Azure Kubernetes services, Google, Kubernetes engine, or Elastic Kubernetes service in AWS, right? So there are different ways are available. So we'll talk about later. We'll come back with some demo on Kubernetes and the cloud provider Kubernetes as well. So now let's focus on this Docker Compose file. What it is does here. So we have to create a service, right? Inside the service we need to mention all these APIs, like we are deploying the front end. In the front end we are building the dot front, right? Dot front means we are building this application, containerizing this front end folder, and it will pick up the Docker file from here and then build it, right? And build and containerize this application using this Docker file, right? The front end. So let's understand front end. And in this front end, the React.js will be containerized, and it will be depends on backend. Depends on means before deploying this, it should deploy the backend first, right? Because it is dependent on this. So if you deploy this and somebody is clicking on delete or getting the student list, it will not come because it is not deployed yet. So it is depend on backend. So the backend will be um, deploy first, then it will be deploy later. So that is the way we deploy, right? In Docker Composer. Now the front end is deployed. Before that it will be deployed like the backend, right? In the backend folder is backend again, right? And this will be built, and once we says build backend, it will automatically pick up the Docker file in the backend folder and run it, and this will be exposed 5000 port, right? And this is, and the React JS will be exposed 3000 port, and this is 5000 port backend, right? So these two will be containerized. And now the third container we have the Nginx, right? Nginx service. These are the service. One is the front end, back end, and Nginx. In the Nginx we are using, we are not using any folder. We are just directly downloading the Nginx latest image, and this will be containerized and exposing port 8083 8082. By default it has the 880 port, because in the production we always use 80, but because of some constraint on my system, I'm just using 8082. I'll let you why we are using the 8082 here. So we can always use 80 for the front end application, right? So as per your requirement, for development we can use any port over here, but for production definitely 80. And volume, right? Volume is front end. We are just deploying the configuration of Nginx, right? Front end Nginx dot config file. We are just mounting this volume, right? Mounting means this Nginx will be used here in the etc Nginx config the default dot conf, right? So we are just mounting means this file path will be used this file, right? So this will be mount, this folder and file will be mount to this folder and file, right? So we haven't understood this folder. Let's understand this one, Nginx, because it is inside the front end. So let's understand it. And before that, let's depends on front end. So Nginx won't be installed or containerized before the front end, right? So front end will be containerized first, then the Nginx, right? So how we did is, first of all, the backend will be containerized because it is depends on the front end is dependent on backend, and then the front end will be containerized because it is depends on the Nginx is depends on the front end, and then later last the Nginx will be deployed. So let's understand this one. I just forgot nginx.conf. So Nginx on conf, because this is the web server, right? We need to run our application and access the front end, right? The front end, this one, front end one, from the browser. So it listen always 80 port, and by default it is 80. Server name localhost. So you can give you your own domain name if you want to access your application, some domain name that will be come here, right? But because I'm not exposing this to the internet, so I'm not changing here. I'm just using the local host for the development environment, or somewhere you have some domain name, from there you are accessing, right? For your local machine, local server, you can use the local host, right? So that will work. Now, as I said, the proxy pass http frontend 3000 frontend, as I said, right? The API, this is the front end. If you can see the Docker compose, this is the front end, right? It will use the front end service, and this is the backend service, correct? These are the service we are using here, and Nginx service. So this front end will be always use wherever it is deployed, and the port, right? So we need not to mention any port over here, because this is the service we are using, this service with the port. Now let's go to the Nginx. You can see the front end port 3000. So we are accessing the front end here, and this will be published as a this one, local host, the local host, and only the local host. This will be exposed into localhost 8080, right? So localhost, this will be accessed, and the API. So we will directly, if we can also mention some different name over here, but we want to, this is the web application, we can directly access this. So this will be access only the local host, right? And this is the backend API. We will use localhost slash API to this one, right? So how will access the backend? HTTP, the service name, the backend service dot 5000. So this will be used as a backend. So how we will use these application? We will use localhost only for the this one, and for the backend we will use localhost slash API, correct? But still we need to use, uh, we need to expose this one once it is called, right? So Nginx we will use 808082. So that will be use 8082 as a front end application, correct? So this is the code understanding. Now let's go to the command prompt and see how we can deploy this application, right? We are now in command prompt. Now we have already discussed how to create a virtual machine, Linux virtual machine inside the Windows, right? Using the Vagrant and VirtualBox. If you want to see or watch that video before this, you can go and check how to create. So we have the Vagrant file already there. Let's log into the Vagrant using Vagrant SSH, right? So it will take us to the Ubuntu box, right? So if it is still not up, then we need to make it up. Yeah, so now it is logged in. Let's see. Yeah, so we have already mapped this Node.js folder here, so we can see our code. So let's cd Node.js. Now we are in the folder. Let's list of, see. we have the backend, front end folder, and Docker Compose, right? So we have already installed Docker and Docker Compose into this system. So if you are new on the Docker side, just comment, or write on the comment section that you want to know how to install Docker or Docker Compose. Definitely we'll come back with some videos on this, right? Or you want urgently, just comment us. We will definitely give you a step by step how to install Docker and Docker Compose, right? Now we have already installed, so we will write one code to containerize this application, and then we'll check the application is working fine or not. Let's move to the sudo mode to su. Now we are in the root, you know user. I'm root user now. Now let's run docker compose pose up, and I want to run this as a daemon, right? So let's daemon means, so in the backend this whole container will be run, so we need not to worry. So now this is started, they started the all these three one. So let's move to the browser and check how it is working. So this container is already working. So let's remove all these images container and then rerun, so that you can check how will delete all these container. uh, so let's run some command, docker compose, down, right? So now let's check if any container is running on your system. Docker ps -a, it will show you. So there is no docker is running, right? So let's list any images also there in your system. Docker images, images there. Let's remove all these images. Docker rmi, docker images -a. So how will it work? It will list all these images. Now let's check docker images. Now you see all the images are deleted. So how it works, where it is, see, docker and rmi, this is the remove image, rmi the for remove images, right? Rm remove images, and this one will list all your docker images, like docker images -a. It will give you the list of images, and docker rmi will remove, right? So remove, it will list all the list will be removed through docker rmi command, right? Now clear this. Now everything is clear. Now you can run now docker compose up -d. Now you can see one by one the container will be built, installed, and containerized, and expose some port, right? So you can see this this is building the first, this is the building the backend first, right? As we discussed, the front end is depends on backend, so backend will be built first and deploy, and then front end will be built and deploy, and third the Nginx will be built and deploy. Now you can see uh, the backend, front end, and Nginx is deployed, right? So let's move to the browser and type localhost colon 8082. So why we use 8082 is so we have deploy our application to the Ubuntu, right? And Ubuntu we created through VirtualBox. In the VirtualBox we need to open one port, so we have open only one port. We can open multiple port as well. For demo we create only or create only one port, open one port 8082 into the Ubuntu box, virtual box. So that's why I just map this 8082 Ubuntu box to my Windows host, right? So let's run this 8082. Now you can see this small action. We have created this UI in React, right? In the first we have the button is add a student and the list, right? Two form we have created for the add a student and list a student. In the list to student we have the delete button also. So let's try to add, let's say Sham, grade A, and add. So it will add here. Now add one more one more list, Raman, and grade B, and add again. You can see it is added. And you can delete this one, you can delete this one, you can add again. So this application is created, and this is the React.js API. And these button, delete button, add button is using the API, backend API, to create the student into the backend Node.js API and access all these stored students from there. So that's how it is working, right? So let's move to the slide. So we have done with this demo. If you have any questions, queries, or you need any help on any areas like the cloud, DevOps, C Sharp, ASP.NET, Jenkins, any kind of issue you are facing, right, to develop, build, or deploy, or create something in somewhere, or even the the AI/ML part also, just please write your concerned queries. Will definitely answer or come back with some very good videos on that, right? So thank you so much for watching my video. We'll come back with such more videos. Till then, thank you so much and bye.